it's not only to religious icons via the external savior program, and in particular the crucifixion implants that we give away our personal power to, that we relinquish our self sovereignty to when we project our energies outside of ourselves, when we're looking for an external savior, a person to come along and take care of our, clean up our life. That is part of the control paradigm of the age of Pisces. When we give our power away, when we do not take responsibility for ourselves and correct our own path. It is not only religious icons, it is icons in politics, certainly in the entertainment industry. Entertainment. How about the entrainment industry via MK Ultra Monarch programs, the Tavistock Institute of social engineering, of entraining, of completely laying templates of existential ontological pathways over young minds, unsuspecting populations, beholden to their id, to their pleasure principle, seeking only self instant gratification. And this information goes very deep by our controllers, by the controllers, by the people that have been in control of organized religion, of the entertainment industry, of the military industrial complex. It's very deep, folks. And this subject that I'm going to share, this information rather, that I'm going to share with you, I want you to pay attention to it if you're a young person or any kind of person that's caught up in any kind of negative lifestyle, where you're destroying your divinity through living an animal type existence, through satisfying, all of your lower animal um, pursuits. But listen, I'm going to share this information and I'm going to read an anonymous letter. And the information is pretty deep, so please stay with me and pay attention. After more than 20 years, I finally decided to tell the world what I witnessed in 1991, which I believe was one of the biggest turning points in popular music and ultimately American society. I have struggled for a long time weighing the pros and cons of making this story public, as I was reluctant to implicate the individuals who were present that day. So I've simply decided to leave out names and all the details that may risk my personal well being and that of those who were, like me, dragged into something they weren't ready for. Between the late 80s and early 90s, I was what you may call a decision maker with one of the more established companies in the music industry. I came from Europe in the early 80s and quickly established myself in the business. The industry was different back then, since technology and media weren't accessible to people like they are today. The industry had more control over the public and had the means to influence them any way it wanted. This may explain why in early 1991 I was invited to attend a closed door meeting with a small group of music business insiders to discuss rap music's new direction. Little did I know we would be asked to participate in one of the most unethical and destructive business practices I've ever seen. The meeting was held at a private residence on the outskirts of Los Angeles. I remember about 25 to 30 people being there, most of them familiar faces. Speaking to those I knew, we joked about the theme of the meeting, as many of us did not care for rap music and failed to see the purpose of being invited to a private gathering to discuss its future. Among the attendees was a small group of unfamiliar faces who stayed to themselves and made no attempt to socialize beyond their circle. Based on their behavior and formal appearance, they didn't seem to be in our industry. Our casual chatter was interrupted when we were asked to sign a confidentiality agreement, preventing us from publicly discussing the information presented during the meeting. Needless to say, this intrigued and in some cases disturbed many of us. The agreement was only a page long, but very clear on the matter and consequences, which stated that violating the terms would result in job termination. We asked several people what this meeting was about and the reason for such secrecy, but couldn't find anyone who had answers for us. A few people refused to sign and walked out. No one stopped them. I was tempted to follow, but curiosity got the best of me. A man who was part of the unfamiliar group collected the agreements from us. Quickly after the meeting began, one of my industry colleagues, who shall remain nameless, like everyone else, thanked us for attending. He then gave the floor to a man who only introduced himself by first name and gave no further details about his personal background. I think he was the owner of the residence, but it was never confirmed. He briefly praised all of us for the success we had achieved in our industry and congratulated us for being selected as part of this small group of decision makers. At this point, I began to feel slightly uncomfortable at the strangeness of this gathering. The subject quickly changed as the speaker went on to tell us that the respective companies we represented had invested in a very profitable industry which could become even more rewarding with our active involvement. He explained that the companies we worked for had invested millions into building of privately owned prisons, and that our positions of influences in the music industry would actually impact the profitability of these investments. I remember many of us in the group immediately looking at each other in confusion. At the time, I didn't know what a private prison was, but I wasn't the only one. Sure enough, someone asked what these prisons were and what any of this had to do with us. We were told that these prisons were built by privately owned companies who received funding from the government based on the number of inmates. The more inmates, the more money the government would pay these prisons. It was also made clear to us that since these prisons are privately owned, as they become publicly traded, we'd be able to buy shares. Most of us were taken back by this. Again, a couple of people asked what this had to do with us. At this point, my industry colleague, who had first opened the meeting, took the floor again and answered our questions. He told us that since our employers had become silent investors in this prison business, it was now in their interest to make sure that these prisons remain filled. Our job would be to help make this happen by marketing music which promotes criminal behavior, rap being the music of choice. He assured us that this would be a great situation for us because rap music was becoming an increasingly profitable market for our companies. And as an employee, we'd also be able to buy personal stocks in these prisons. Immediately, silence came over the room. You could have heard a pin drop. I remember looking around to make sure I wasn't dreaming and saw half of the people with dropped jaws. My daze was interrupted when someone shouted, "Is this a effing joke?" At this point, things became chaotic. Two of the men who were part of the unfamiliar group grabbed the man who shouted out and attempted to remove him from the house. A few of us, myself included, tried to intervene. One of them pulled out a gun, and we all backed off. They separated us from the crowd, and all four of us were escorted outside. My industry colleague, who had opened the meeting earlier, hurried out to meet us and reminded us that we had signed agreement and would suffer the consequences of speaking about this publicly or even with those who attended the meeting. I asked him why he was involved with something this corrupt, and he replied that it was bigger than the music business and nothing we'd want to challenge without risking consequences. We all protested, and as we walked back into the house, I remember word for word the last thing he said. "It is out of my hands now. Remember, you signed an agreement." Sounds like Pontius Pilate when he washed his hands of crucifying the first Christ. He then closed the door behind him. The man rushed us to our cars and actually watched until we drove off. A million things were going through my mind as I drove away, and I eventually decided to pull over and park on a side street in order to collect my thoughts. I replayed everything in my mind repeatedly, and it all seemed very surreal to me. I was angry with myself for not having taken a more active role in the questioning what had been presented to us. I'd like to believe the shock of it all is what suspended my better nature. After what seemed like an eternity, I was able to calm myself enough to make it home. I didn't talk or call anyone that night. The next day, back at the office, I was visibly out of it, but blamed it on being under the weather. No one else in my department had been invited to the meeting, and I felt a sense of guilt for not being able to share what I had witnessed. I thought about contacting the three others who were kicked out of the house, but I didn't remember their names and thought that tracking them down would probably bring unwanted attention. I considered speaking out publicly at the risk of losing my job, but I realized I'd probably be jeopardizing more than my job, and I wasn't willing to risk that anything happening to my family. I thought about those men with guns and wondered who they were. I had been told that this was bigger than the music business, and all I could do was let my imagination run free. There were no answers and no one to talk to. I tried to do a little bit of research on private prisons, but I didn't uncover anything about the music business involvement. However, the information I did find confirmed how dangerous this prison business really was. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Eventually, it was as if the meeting had never taken place. It all seemed surreal. I became more reclusive and stopped going to any industry events unless professionally obligated to do so. On two occasions, I found myself attending the same function as my former colleague. Both times our eyes met, but nothing more was exchanged. As the months passed, rap music had definitely changed direction. I was never a fan of it, but even I could tell the difference. Rap acts that talked about politics or harmless fun were quickly fading away as gangster rap started dominating the airwaves. Only a few months had passed since the meeting, but I suspect that the ideas presented that day had been successfully implemented. It was as if the order has been given to all major label executives. The music was climbing the charts, and most companies were more than happy to capitalize on it. Each one was churning out their very own gangster rap acts on an assembly line. Everyone brought into it, customers included. Everyone bought into it, customers included. Violence and drug use became a central theme in most rap music. I spoke to a few of my peers in the industry to get their opinions on the new trend, but was told repeatedly that it was all about supply and demand. Sadly, many of them even expressed that the music reinforced their prejudice of minorities. I officially quit the music business in 1993, but my heart had already led much more. So anyway, this was a letter, but I'm going to tell you what the nuts and bolts of the meeting were all about, folks, because you had the CIA that were at that meeting, along with these record industry executives, along with the representatives of the privatized prison industry. And what they said was, we're going if you take money and solely market to these gangster rap acts, sometimes even creating them, like Dr. Dre and all those guys. They were just kids that they were never in a gang. They were like wearing silver suits and playing disco, and then all of a sudden they became gangster rappers because the record industry offered them signing bonuses and basically groomed them and gave them their thematic content, as it were. But at each rap music, criminal rap band that was signed, they got kickbacks from the record industry, and thus the privatized prison industry had a steady flow of you know people that were going into the prisons because they were listening to this music, which was a glorified criminal lifestyle. So anyway, it's all a scam, folks. Everything from religion, which is a scam that grooms people to be great little citizens just to on the assembly line just to get ready to go to war, and it just doesn't stop. But when we take our personal power back and we begin to look with eyes that see through the spirit, and we are courageous and unflinching, we the the scales of injustice and the scales of evil fall right before us. That includes everybody. Jesus, Ice Cube, 50 Cent, P-DIDDY, all of them. They've all been created uh, and they've all been exploited. We've all been exploited. Let's begin to take our power back. And you can do that by hitting the subscribe button and leaving this video a yo, 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 thumbs up, baby. Leave two of them. All right, is that a wrap? Martin Scorsese. Cut? Scene cut? All right.